Caleb Mercer didn't buy Bellwether Farm because it was beautiful. He bought it because Nora needed a place where she could stop packing a suitcase in her mind. If stories about family and second chances matter to you, like, subscribe, and comment your city. Caleb Mercer had spent 11 years learning how to stay calm when alarms went off. In the Air Force, calm was not a personality trait, it was survival. A red warning light, a fuel leak, a cracked hydraulic line, a generator screaming in the dark, those things had rules. You found the problem, isolated the damage, followed the checklist, and kept your hands steady, even when every nerve in your body wanted to shake. But no one had ever handed Caleb a checklist for a hospital waiting room at 2:13 in the morning, with rain sliding down the windows and a 6-year-old girl asking why her mother's coat was still folded on the chair if her mother was not coming back to wear. He stood beneath the pale fluorescent lights of St. Anselm Medical Center in Louisville, his uniform jacket replaced by a worn gray hoodie, his duffel bag still in the trunk of his truck because he had driven straight from the base after the call. His younger sister, Megan Mercer, had worked the night shift as a nurse at a long-term care clinic outside the city. She had been driving home after 12 hours on her feet when a pickup crossed the center line on a wet stretch of road near Shepherdsville. The state trooper had said the words gently, as if softness could make them less final. Caleb had nodded through the explanation, signed where they told him to sign, answered questions he barely heard, and kept looking toward the hallway, because some part of him still expected Megan to come around the corner with her badge clipped crooked to her scrubs, rolling her eyes and saying the whole thing had been a mistake. Nora sat 3 chairs away from him, small inside Megan's oversized blue cardigan, her knees pulled up, her arms locked around a stuffed fox with one missing button eye. She had not cried the way adults expected children to cry. She had gone quiet instead, the kind of quiet that made people lower their voices when they passed. Every few minutes she looked at the automatic doors, then at Caleb, then at Ranger. Ranger, Caleb's retired German shepherd, lay flat on the tile between them, head lifted, ears turning at each footstep. He was 6 years old, sable-coated, broad through the chest, with a faint limp in his left front leg when he rose too quickly. In another life, he had swept perimeters and guarded airfields. Tonight he had chosen a new post without being told. When Nora's fingers loosened from the stuffed fox, Ranger edged closer until his shoulder touched her shoe. She looked down at him for a long time. "Does he bite?" she whispered. Caleb swallowed. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Not people he's watching over." Nora accepted that with the solemn seriousness of a child who had already learned adults did not always give full answers. A woman in a dark green coat approached with a folder pressed to her chest. "Mr. Mercer," she asked. "I'm Denise Harper, with Jefferson County Child Services." Caleb stood too fast, then caught himself. "Yes, Mom." Denise's face was tired but not unkind. She had the careful expression of someone who had delivered bad news too many times to dress it up. "I know this is a terrible hour to discuss practical matters," she said, lowering her voice. "But we need to talk about Nora's immediate placement." Caleb glanced at Nora. She was watching the rain now, pretending not to listen. "She has me," he said. Denise studied him, not accusing, not convinced. "You are her closest living relative listed in Megan's emergency contacts. But I need to be clear, temporary guardianship is not a handshake. It means housing, school enrollment, meals, medical appointments, supervision, stability. It also means review." Caleb nodded once because nodding was easier than admitting the room seemed to tilt beneath him. "I understand." He did not fully. His apartment near the airport had 1 bedroom, thin walls, a leaking bathroom sink, and neighbors who argued through the night. His work was contract repair, unpredictable hours, decent pay when jobs came in and empty days when they did not. He knew how to rebuild a turbine assembly. He did not know what size shoes Nora wore. Denise opened the folder. "If you do not take emergency placement tonight, we will arrange temporary foster care until a full review is completed." Nora turned then. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on Caleb with a kind of careful terror that struck him harder than grief had. "Uncle Caleb," she said, barely above a breath, "do I have to go with strangers?" There were answers that could have protected him. He could have said he needed time. He could have said he was not ready. He could have said the truth, that he was frightened broken ways no bank statement could show, and carrying guilt so old it felt like bone. Instead, he looked at Megan's cardigan slipping off Nora's shoulder, at Ranger lying guard at her feet, at the rain making silver lines down the glass. He took the pen from Denise Harper's hand. His signature looked steadier than he felt. Nora did not run to him. She simply stood, picked up her fox, and walked close enough for her sleeve to brush his wrist. Ranger rose beside them, silent and certain. Caleb looked down at the little girl he had promised to protect before he had any idea how to do it. And for the first time that night, the alarms inside him had no checklist at all. Caleb brought Nora home just before dawn, when the city was still half asleep and the sky over Louisville had the dull blue color of old steel. His apartment sat on the second floor of a brick building near an industrial road, close enough to the airport that some nights the windows trembled when cargo planes climbed into the dark. It was not unsafe in any obvious way. The locks worked. The heat came on if you kicked the baseboard once. The refrigerator hummed with the stubborn loyalty of an old machine. But the place had never been asked to hold a child's grief. The stairwell light flickered. The hallway smelled faintly of fried food and cigarette smoke, and the playground behind the building had yellow caution tape wrapped around the swings because one of the chains had snapped months ago, and no one had fixed it. Nora noticed that before she noticed anything else. She stood beside Caleb's truck with Megan's cardigan bundled in her arms and looked past the fence. "Can kids still play there?" she asked. Caleb followed her eyes. "Not right now." When? He did not know. When they repair it. She accepted that answer the way children accept weather, not because it satisfies them, but because they cannot change it. Inside, Caleb tried to turn the apartment into something warmer by force of effort. He bought the cereal Nora pointed to at Kroger, the one with tiny marshmallows shaped like stars. He placed a small white desk by the living room window because the bedroom barely fit her twin mattress. He taped a school calendar to the refrigerator, then added a second sheet beneath it labeled Morning Moutine in block letters. Breakfast, teeth, shoes, backpack, bus folder. He meant it as reassurance. Nora stared at it as if he had posted rules for a place she had not agreed to live. Ranger took the corner nearest the front door, lowered himself to the floor, and watched every movement in the hall through the gap beneath the frame. At night, the building came alive in pieces, a couple arguing below them, a television too loud through the wall, trucks braking on wet pavement, someone dragging trash bags down the stairs at midnight. Nora never complained, but Caleb saw the way her shoulders tightened when voices rose. He saw how she slept with one hand gripping the stuffed fox and the other curled into Megan's cardigan. He saw how she watched his face before asking for anything, as if every need had to pass inspection first. Caleb did what he knew how to do. He checked whether she had eaten. He asked if her homework was finished. He made sure she wore a coat. His questions came out clipped and practical, shaped by years of briefings and maintenance logs. "Did you drink water? Are your shoes tied? Is your backpack packed?" He did not ask. "Did something remind you of your mom today?" He did not ask. "Are you scared when the neighbors yell?" He did not ask because he was afraid the answers would require a tenderness he had not practiced in years. One Thursday, after a late job repairing ground equipment at the airport, Caleb came home with oil still under his fingernails and sat down on the couch for what he told himself would be 10 minutes. The next thing he felt was Ranger's cold nose pushing hard against his hand. The room was bright. The clock on the microwave read 3:47. Caleb bolted upright so fast the dog backed away. Nora's school pickup had been at 3:05. He drove with his jaw locked, obeying the speed limit only because fear did not give him the right to endanger anyone else. When he reached the elementary school, the buses were gone. The sidewalk was mostly empty. Nora sat on the front steps beside a teacher, her backpack in her lap, her fox tucked under one arm. She did not cry when she saw him. She did not run. She just stood up, small and patient, as if she had known he would come eventually. That quiet trust cut deeper than blame. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, kneeling in front of her. The words felt too small. Nora looked at him, then at Ranger waiting in the truck window. "I saved him a seat in my head," she said softly, "so I wouldn't feel by myself." Caleb had no answer that could fix that. 2 days later, Denise Harper came for the first home visit. Caleb had cleaned until the apartment smelled sharply of bleach. Nora's desk was organized, the fridge was full, the bed was made. Denise walked through each room with her folder, asking measured questions, noticing things Caleb hoped she would miss. The thin walls, the broken playground, the lack of a separate bedroom, the unpredictable work schedule written in pencil because it changed too often. At the kitchen table, she closed the folder but did not stand. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I don't doubt that you care about Nora." Caleb kept his hands flat on the table. "Then what do you doubt?" Denise looked toward the living room, where Nora sat on the floor leaning against Ranger's side. "I doubt whether you have a system strong enough to care for her long term." The words did not accuse him. That was what made them harder to dismiss. After Denise left, Caleb stood by the window and watched a semi roll past, its headlights sliding across the ceiling. Nora was asleep on the couch, one hand buried in Ranger's fur. The apartment was warm, the door was locked, there was food in the kitchen. And still, for the first time, Caleb understood with painful clarity that shelter and home were not the same thing. Caleb found the lumber yard because he had started measuring every dollar by what it could become. $20 was not $20 anymore. It was a box of cereal, 2 gallons of milk, gas for 3 school runs, or enough second-hand plywood to build Nora a shelf beside her desk. The place sat off an old county road east of Louisville, half salvage yard, half hardware graveyard, with stacks of warped boards, dented gutters, used windows, old porch rails, and doors leaning against each other like tired men outside a diner. Caleb had gone there looking for discounted lumber to fix the loose step outside his apartment building. Even though the landlord had promised to handle it next week, 3 weeks in a row, Nora was at school. Ranger waited in the truck, nose pointed toward the cracked window, his ears shifting every time a forklift beeped. Caleb was sorting through a stack of 2x4s when an older man in a faded brown canvas jacket stopped a few feet away and said, "You Megan Mercer's brother?" Caleb turned slowly. He had grown used to people saying Megan's name in a lowered voice, as if it might break if spoken too loudly. "Yes, sir." The man nodded once, not with pity but with recognition. "Walt Grady. Your sister helped care for my wife her last 5 months. June Grady, pancreatic cancer." Caleb remembered Megan mentioning a June who liked peppermint tea and old hymns, a woman who corrected nurses if they tried to fluff her pillow the wrong way. "I'm sorry," Caleb said. Walt looked down at the board in Caleb's hand. "So am I. Your sister was steady. That's rarer than people think." It was the kind of compliment Caleb could not answer, so he only nodded. Walt stood beside him for a moment, both men pretending to study lumber. Then Walt said, "You still got the little girl?" Caleb's hand tightened around the board. "Nora." "Yes." "You looking for a better place?" Caleb almost said no because pride was faster than truth. Instead, he exhaled. "I'm looking for something I can afford." Walt gave a dry sound that was not quite a laugh. Those two don't usually meet in the same room. He pulled a folded flyer from his coat pocket, creased soft from being handled. The photo showed a white farmhouse with peeling paint, a red barn behind it, and grass grown wild around the fence line. "Bellwether Farm," Walt said. 70 minutes from Louisville if traffic behaves. 15 acres, house is old. Barn's worse. Well, pump acts like it has moods. Chicken coop needs more prayer than lumber. But the soil's good. My wife kept tomatoes there that tasted like August. Caleb stared at the photo, not because it looked beautiful, but because it looked possible in the dangerous, a bad idea sometimes did, when a man was tired enough to need hope. Walt watched him carefully. Weyerhaeuser's company's been calling. They'd scrape it flat and put up storage units. His jaw worked once. That land fed people. I don't much like the idea of it dying under concrete. Caleb drove out that Saturday with Nora and Ranger. The farther they got from Louisville, the quieter the roads became. Factories gave way to gas stations, then churches with letterboard signs, then fields still brown from winter. Nora sat in the back seat with her fox buckled beside her. She had asked 3 times if they were moving there, and 3 times Caleb had said, "We're only looking." Bellwether Farm appeared at the end of a gravel drive, and it did not pretend to be anything it was not. The farmhouse was white, only where weather had not stripped it gray. One corner of the porch sagged low enough that Caleb immediately pictured a child's ankle, twisting through a loose board. A brown water stain spread beneath the front eave. The red barn leaned slightly to the east, as if it had been listening too long to the wind. Tall grass crowded the path, rusted wire sagged between fence posts, and the chicken coop behind the house looked like it had survived a fight it had not won. Nora stood beside the truck without speaking. Ranger stepped out first, sniffed the air, and began a slow sweep of the yard, not excited, not fearful, just working. Walt came from the porch, moving carefully down the steps. Told you it wasn't dressed for company. Caleb looked at the roofline, the gutters, the slope of the land. He saw work everywhere. Expensive work. Work that did not care how tired he already was. But he also heard nothing behind the walls because there were no shared walls. No shouting downstairs. No trucks grinding past the window every 20 minutes. No broken playground behind yellow tape. Only wind, crows, gravel under Nora's shoes, and Ranger's quiet breathing near the fence. Nora tilted her head back toward the pale afternoon sky. "Are there real stars here?" she asked. Walt looked at her with a gentleness that made Caleb glance away. "Yes, Mom," he said, "and they come back every night." Caleb walked the property twice. He asked about taxes, septic, the well, the roof, the road, the nearest school, the winter bills. Walt answered plainly. No sales pitch, no mercy discount dressed up as charity. The price was $86,000, $14,000 down. The rest paid directly to Walt over 8 years, written properly, no tricks. Caleb had $14,000 in savings if he emptied nearly everything. He also had Megan's small insurance check, sitting untouched in an envelope in his apartment, already marked in black ink. Nora College, don't touch. That money was not his bridge out of trouble. It was Nora's bridge into a future Megan would never get to see. That night, after Nora fell asleep on the couch with Ranger stretched along the floor beside her, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with the flyer, a calculator, and a legal pad filled with numbers that looked unforgiving no matter how he arranged them. Rent, gas, repairs, feed, school, insurance, Walt's payment, emergency savings he did not really have. The apartment hummed around him. A siren passed somewhere distant. Then another truck downshifted on the road. Caleb looked toward Nora, small beneath Megan's cardigan, her face softer in sleep than it ever was awake. He picked up his pen and wrote one sentence beneath the columns of debt. "I'm not buying a farm. I'm buying her a chance to grow up without apologizing for being here." The sentence did not make the math better. It only made the risk honest. Bellwether Farm did not welcome them so much as tolerate their arrival. The gravel drive rattled under Caleb's old pickup, and the rented trailer behind it complained over every rut, as if warning him to turn around while there was still time. Nora sat in the passenger seat with Megan's framed photograph wrapped in a towel on her lap. She had insisted on holding it herself, both hands flat against the glass, as if a bump in the road might loosen the last thing she understood. Ranger stood braced in the back seat, nose close to the cracked window, reading the new place through scent before anyone else had a chance to judge it. They had not brought much. 2 mattresses tied down with rope, 4 plastic bins of clothes, Caleb's tool chest, Nora's school papers, a box of Egan's things Caleb had not been ready to open, a bag of dog food, 3 chipped plates, 2 lamps, 1 coffee maker, and a folding table that would have to serve as a dining room, office, repair bench, and homework station until life became more generous. When Caleb cut the engine, silence settled around them in a way that felt almost too large. No trucks grinding past the windows, no neighbors shouting through drywall, no airport engines climbing over the roof, just wind moving through high grass, a loose strip of metal tapping somewhere near the barn, and a crow calling from the fence line like it had questions. Nora stepped down carefully and looked at the farmhouse. "It looks tired," she said. Caleb followed her gaze to the peeling paint, the sagging porch, the dark stain under the front eave where water had found its way in. "It is," he said. "Can houses get untired?" Caleb looked at the trailer, then at the porch boards, then at the roof he already knew would cost more than he wanted to admit. Some can. He carried the mattresses in first and set them on the bedroom floors. There was no time to make the place pretty. Pretty could wait. Dry had to come first. Safe had to come before comfortable. He opened his black notebook on the folding table and wrote the first page of their new life in capital letters. Stop leak over living room. Brace front porch, check well, clear barn, rebuild chicken coop, fix east fence, Richter Nora for school. Do not panic. He stared at the last line longer than the others. Nora came up beside him and read what she could. "Why did you write that one?" she asked. Because sometimes orders work better when you can see them. She considered that, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. The roof became the first battle. Caleb had repaired aircraft support equipment in desert heat and freezing rain. He had taken apart engines with parts so small they could vanish under a fingernail. But roofing was different. Roofing did not sit politely on a bench under a light. Roofing required balance, patience, and a tolerance for heights that he had apparently misplaced somewhere between the Air Force and Kentucky. He climbed the ladder with a tarp, roofing nails, sealant, and more confidence than experience. 10 minutes later, his boot slipped on a damp patch of shingle. He caught himself hard, slammed his elbow against the roof edge, and sent an entire plastic box of nails sliding down the slope. They spilled across the yard like silver rain. Nora, sitting on an overturned paint bucket with a coloring book balanced on her knees, looked up. "Are you okay?" Caleb took one slow breath, then another. "Still here." "Is that yes?" "That's yes enough." Ranger did not watch Caleb. He had chosen his duty more clearly than either of them. He sat several feet in front of Nora, body turned away from the house, amber eyes scanning the grass, the fence, the tree line, the open space beyond the barn. Every so often his ears lifted, and his head moved a few degrees toward some sound Caleb could not hear. It should have made Caleb feel foolish, being guarded by a dog while he wrestled with a tarp. Instead, it steadied him. Somebody on that farm knew exactly what his job was. By the second afternoon, the worst leak over the living room was covered. Not fixed, Caleb corrected himself. Covered. There was a difference, and pretending otherwise was how people got hurt. He moved to the porch next, replacing 2 rotted boards and bracing the low corner with temporary posts until he could afford proper lumber. Nora handed him screws one at a time from a coffee can, serious as a surgical nurse. "This one, that one. Now this one, good eye." A small smile appeared and disappeared so quickly he might have missed it if he had not been watching. Later that day, the sun broke through for the first time since they had arrived, and a yellow butterfly drifted across the yard near the tall grass by the east fence. Nora set down the coffee can and followed it. One step, then 2, drawn by the fragile bright thing moving over all that brown. Ranger rose before Caleb did. He crossed the yard fast, not lunging, not snarling, just placing his body sideways between Nora and the fence line. Then he barked once, sharp and low. Caleb stood, screwdriver still in his hand. Near a crooked fence post, half hidden in weeds, a small snake slid through the grass and disappeared under a sheet of rusted tin. It was gone almost before Nora saw it. Her face tightened. Was it bad? Caleb walked to her slowly, keeping his voice even. It was just being what it is. But Ranger stopped me, because Ranger saw it before we did. Nora looked at the grass differently then. Not with fear exactly, but with a new kind of attention. Caleb crouched beside her, his sore elbow throbbing, dirt on his jeans, sweat drying at the back of his neck. "Listen to me, kiddo. We don't have to be scared of the land." He pointed toward the field, the fence, the barn, the place that was already asking more of him than he knew how to give. But we do have to respect it. This isn't a playground with soft corners. Out here we learn where to step. We watch. We listen. We take care of things. And we don't pretend we're bigger than weather or animals or old wood. Nora looked at Ranger, then at the fence. "So the farm has rules?" Caleb almost smiled. "Everything worth living with has rules." That night, rain came again. Not hard, but steady enough to test his work. Caleb stood in the living room with a flashlight, watching the ceiling. One drop formed near the old stain, swelled, trembled, then held. He waited another minute, then another. No water fell. From the mattress on the floor, Nora whispered, "Did we win?" Caleb turned off the flashlight. Ranger lay across the doorway, one ear raised. The house creaked around them, tired but still standing. "For tonight," Caleb said. "For tonight we did." Caleb bought the chicks on a Wednesday afternoon from Mason Feed and Supply, a narrow store on the edge of Cedar Ridge that smelled like grain dust, rubber boots, motor oil, and the kind of coffee that had been sitting on a hot plate since sunrise. Nora heard them before she saw them. The soft, frantic peeping came from a galvanized stock tank under 2 red heat lamps near the back wall. 18 yellow and brown lives moving over pine shavings like tiny thoughts that could not sit still. She stopped so suddenly that Ranger's leash went tight in Caleb's hand. "Are they babies?" she asked. Mason Cole, the store owner, looked over the counter. He was a heavy-set man with silver hair, suspenders, and a pencil tucked behind one ear. Pullets mostly, couple days old. They'll be hens if the good Lord and your fence both do their jobs. Caleb was not buying chickens because he believed 18 chicks would save a farm. He knew better than that. He bought them because Nora needed a reason to go outside in the morning. Something small enough to hold carefully. Something alive that expected tomorrow. He bought them because eggs could become $5 a dozen at the end of the driveway someday. And $5 was not nothing anymore. He bought them because a farm without animals felt like a house with all the lights off. Nora crouched beside the tank, eyes wide but cautious. Do they know us? Not yet, Caleb said. Can they learn? Mason answered before Caleb could. Most living things can, if you show up the same way long enough. Caleb carried home 18 chicks in 2 cardboard boxes with air holes punched in the sides, plus a bag of starter feed, a waterer, bedding, and a heat lamp that cost more than he had expected. Nora held one box on her lap all the way back to Bellwether Farm, whispering names through the holes. Penny, June, Waffle, Dot, Sunday. Caleb did not tell her she might not be able to tell them apart later. Some truths could wait. The coop behind the house was in worse condition than he had admitted to himself. The frame leaned. The wire mesh had gaps big enough for a raccoon to write its name through. The door scraped dirt and would not latch. One wall was soft with rot where rain had run down from a torn strip of tin roofing. Caleb stood in front of it with his notebook open, then closed it again. Lists were helpful until the work laughed at them. He measured twice, cut once, then discovered the old studs were not square. He pulled off the bad boards, found worse boards beneath them, replaced those, then had to replace what they had been attached to. A simple repair became a rebuild by inches. Nora sat on an upside-down bucket with the chicks safe in a temporary brooder inside the mudroom, drawing each one in a notebook and trying to match names to patterns. Ranger stationed himself between the mudroom door and the yard, as if he understood that the farm had added 18 foolish little citizens who could not defend themselves from anything. Caleb worked until his shoulders burned. The hammer felt awkward after too many years with wrenches and precision tools. Wood split when he drove nails too close to the edge, wire snagged his sleeves. The latch refused to line up. Around dusk, as he tried to hold a board in place with one knee and drive a nail at a bad angle, the hammer glanced off the head and came down hard across the base of his left thumb. Pain flashed white up his arm. He dropped the hammer and used words under his breath that Nora did not need to hear. She looked up from the bucket. Did the house hurt you again? Caleb clenched and unclenched his hand, already swelling. The house had help. He wrapped it in a dish towel and kept working longer than he should have, because stopping felt too much like failing. By nightfall, the coop had 4 solid walls, patched wire, fresh bedding, and a door that closed if lifted slightly with one boot, not perfect. Better. That was becoming the farm's language. Better, not perfect. 2 days later, the cold came wrong. The forecast had said 41 degrees. By midnight, frost silvered the porch rail, and the wind slipped through places Caleb had not sealed well enough. The chicks huddled under the heat lamp in the mudroom, while Caleb slept badly on a mattress near the hallway, his swollen hand resting on his chest. Ranger lifted his head twice, listening. Caleb woke before dawn with a feeling he could not name. The mudroom was too quiet. 3 chicks lay still in the shavings, small and weightless in a way no living thing should look. The lamp was working, but it had been angled too far toward one side. The waterer had blocked part of the warmth. The others had crowded close enough to survive. 3 had not. Nora came in wearing socks and Megan's cardigan, her hair tangled from sleep. She saw Caleb kneeling on the floor with the chicks in his palm. Her face changed slowly, understanding arriving before language. Did they go to sleep wrong? She asked. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. There were easy lies. There were gentle lies. He chose neither. They died, honey. Nora stared at the shavings. Because it got cold? Yes. Because I forgot to tell them good night. The question hit him in a place he had not guarded. He set the chicks down in a small cardboard lid and turned fully toward her. No, this was not because of you. Her lip trembled, but she held herself still, too still. Caleb hated that she already knew how to do that. Then why? He looked at the lamp, the gap under the door. The setup he had thought was good enough because he was tired, and his hand hurt, and there had been too many problems at once. Because I didn't prepare well enough, he said. The sentence cost him something, but he made himself say it clearly. I cared about them. That part was real. But caring is not the same as knowing. When we take care of something weaker than us, we have to learn faster. Nora looked down. So grown-ups can mess up. Yes, even when they're trying, especially then sometimes. They buried the 3 chicks beneath the young maple near the barn, where the ground was soft from last week's rain. Caleb dug with one hand and the edge of a trowel. Nora placed 3 small stones over the spot. Ranger stood close, quiet, his nose lowered as if paying respect to a duty no one had assigned him. Afterward, Caleb drove back to Mason's and asked questions he should have asked the first time. Proper lamp height, draft guards, thermometer placement, backup heat, predator proofing. Mason did not mock him. He pulled a pencil from behind his ear and drew a simple brooder setup on the back of a feed receipt. Everybody likes the idea of keeping animals, he said. Fewer people respect how easy it is to fail them. That evening, Caleb rebuilt the brooder with cardboard draft shields. A thermometer at chick level, the lamp chained twice instead of clipped once, and the water moved away from the warmest area. Nora watched everything, not smiling, not yet, but staying. Before bed, she crouched beside the surviving chicks. Good night, she whispered. Then she looked up at Caleb. But also we checked the worm. Caleb nodded. Also we checked the worm. For the first time since Megan died, Nora reached for his hand without thinking. She chose the uninjured one, gently, as if she understood that people, too, had places that still hurt. The well pump quit on a Saturday afternoon with no drama at all. No bang, no smoke, no warning rattle Caleb could diagnose by sound. 1 minute water coughed from the kitchen faucet in short, rusty bursts, and the next minute there was only a hollow shudder in the pipes, followed by silence so complete it seemed the whole farmhouse was holding its breath. Caleb stood at the sink with dish soap on his hands, watching the last thin line of water disappear down the drain. Nora was on the back steps rinsing mud from a plastic bucket for the chicks. "Uncle Caleb?" she called. The hose stopped. He closed his eyes for 1 second, then wiped his hands on his jeans and went outside. The chickens needed clean water. The dishes were stacked in the sink. Nora's hair still smelled faintly of dust from helping him in the garden. The potato rows he had planted that morning were dry, and the beans were just seeds beneath loose soil, waiting for a kindness he could no longer provide. Caleb pulled the metal cover off the well housing with more confidence than the situation deserved. Machines were supposed to make sense. Machines had patterns. Pressure, wear points, faulty contacts, bad seals. He had spent years with engines that cost more than most houses, tracing problems through systems that could not forgive laziness. But the old well at Bellwether Farm had its own stubborn language. A pressure switch corroded green at the screws, wiring that looked older than him, a pressure gauge stuck between numbers, and a pump line that vanished underground as if refusing to explain itself. He crouched in the grass with a flashlight between his teeth, Ranger standing nearby, and realized with rising irritation that knowing machines did not mean knowing this machine. By late afternoon, Caleb had succeeded only in making the problem look more exposed. He had no running water, one scraped knuckle, and Nora watching him from the porch with the careful silence she used when she was trying not to add weight to his shoulders. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. He wanted to say no. Instead, he said, "We have a problem. That's not the same thing." He filled 3 jugs from Walt Grady's outdoor spigot down the road, gave the chickens water first, then loaded Nora and Ranger into the truck and drove to Cedar Ridge Public Library before it closed. The library sat beside the old courthouse, a low brick building with white columns and a flag snapping in the wind. Inside, it smelled like paper, floor polish, and raincoats drying on hooks. Ruth Bell looked up from the front desk when Ranger stopped politely on the mat and Nora peeked from behind Caleb's arm. Ruth was in her late 60s, with silver hair pinned at the back of her head and reading glasses hanging from a chain. She did not ask whether he was managing. She did not tilt her head with pity. She looked at the mud on his boots, the well manual Caleb had printed badly from his phone, and the tightness in his face. "Well pumped?" she asked. Caleb blinked. "That obvious? Around here, people come to the library desperate for 3 reasons. Taxes, custody, paperwork, and water." He gave a tired laugh because it was almost 1. Ruth stepped from behind the desk. Do you want to patch it well enough to get through the week? Or do you want to understand it well enough that next time you don't panic? The question stayed with him, not because it was clever, but because it offered him dignity. She did not offer to rescue him. She offered to teach him. Ruth pulled books from 3 different shelves: a guide to residential well systems, a worn manual on small-scale farming, a poultry care handbook, and a thick book on soil drainage with a cracked spine. She showed Caleb how to use the library computer to save videos for offline viewing, since service at Bellwether faded whenever the clouds got heavy. Nora sat at a children's table drawing Ranger in a yellow hard hat while Ranger lay beneath her chair, chin on his paws, enduring the quiet authority of the library as if it were another kind of command post. That night, Caleb set his phone on top of a can of beans on the kitchen table and replayed a well pump repair video until the narrator's voice became part of the room. He paused, rewound, drew diagrams in his notebook, labeled wires, sketched the pressure tank, wrote down words he had heard before but never needed to respect: priming, cut-in pressure, sediment, check valve. Nora sat beside him in pajamas, coloring her drawing of Ranger with a tool belt. "Are you doing homework?" she asked. "Pretty much. But you're a grown-up." Caleb looked at the frozen image of a man pointing to a pressure switch. "That doesn't get me out of learning." The next morning, with borrowed advice from Ruth's books and a replacement pressure switch from Mason's store, Caleb got the pump running again. The first water came out brown, then cloudy, then clear enough that Nora clapped once before remembering she was not sure if celebration was allowed. Caleb let the faucet run and felt relief move through him so sharply it was almost pain. Later they planted potatoes, green beans, and sweet corn in uneven rows near the south field, crops Ruth had called forgiving, which Caleb appreciated more than he said. Nora pressed a seed potato into the soil and frowned. "Does a potato know it's buried?" Caleb covered it gently. "No. Does it hurt?" "No." He thought for a moment, watching the dark earth settle over something that looked plain and dead, but was not. "But it knows how to wait. Some things survive by growing where nobody can see them yet." Nora looked at the row, then at him, then at Ranger resting in the shade. She did not answer, but she patted the soil twice, soft as a promise. Money did not disappear from Bellwether Farm all at once. It left in handfuls, in receipts folded into Caleb's back pocket, in small charges that looked harmless until he added them at night under the yellow kitchen light. Chicken feed, roofing nails, gas to drive Nora to school before the district approved her bus route, a replacement latch for the coupe, worm medicine for Ranger after he started coughing behind the barn, electric bill, well pump parts, fence staples. Walt Grady's monthly payment, written on the first line of every budget page because Caleb had promised that one before anything else. He kept the numbers in a black notebook, the same way he had once kept maintenance logs, clean columns, dates, amounts, notes in the margin. But unlike aircraft parts, the farm did not wait for approval before needing something. The east fence sagged lower every week, and coyotes had started calling from the far tree line after dark. The chickens were growing fast, not laying yet, eating like they had signed contracts to bankrupt him. Ranger needed his medication. Nora needed new shoes because the old pair pinched her toes, and she did not tell Caleb until he saw the red marks himself. By the second week of May, Caleb had begun taking every repair job people offered. He fixed a generator for Mason Coal behind the feed store, replaced a warped barn door for a retired mail carrier named Glenn, and spent one Saturday under Ruth Bell's kitchen sink, changing a leaking pipe while Nora read on the floor with Ranger's head in her lap. The work helped, but it came in scraps. $50 here, $120 there. A tank of gas gone just to get to the job. At night, Caleb sat at the folding table and ran the same numbers until they blurred. There was one quick answer, and he hated it. Sell half the chickens now. They were healthy, young, and worth enough to buy fence wire and feed for the rest. It was practical, it was clean, it was also short-sighted. If he kept them, they would start laying in a few months. Eggs at the end of the driveway would not make them rich, but steady mattered more than impressive. Steady was breakfast. Steady was school shoes before they became an emergency. Steady was a child learning that tomorrow did not always arrive empty-handed. The other answer waited in the barn under a canvas tarp, a 1978 Ford Bronco, primer gray in places, blue where the old paint still held on, its engine half rebuilt and its seats cracked from years of sun. Caleb's father had bought it when Caleb was 13, back when Saturdays meant scraped knuckles, country radio, and a man who did not say I love you easily, but would teach his son to gap spark plugs for 3 hours without losing patience. After his father died, Caleb had kept the Bronco through every move he could manage. It had followed him from storage unit to storage unit, a project waiting for a future version of himself who had time, money, and no one depending on him. That version of Caleb seemed very far away now. He pulled the tarp off one evening after Nora went to bed. Dust rose in the barn light. Ranger stood beside him, sniffed the tire, then looked up as if asking whether this was another thing that needed guarding. Caleb ran his hand along the hood. He could still see his father's fingers there, broad and scarred, tapping twice before saying, "You don't force old machines, Cal. You listen first." Caleb had listened for years, to engines, to weather, to the sound of Nora not crying in the next room. The next morning he posted the Bronco online with honest photos and an honest description. Project vehicle. Not running, clean title, original parts included. He priced it lower than what it might have been worth finished, and higher than what a desperate man would accept. 3 days later, a mechanic from Bowling Green arrived with a trailer and cash in an envelope. Caleb opened the barn doors wide. Nora watched from the porch with Ranger at her side. She did not know the whole history, but children can feel when an object weighs more than it looks. The man winched the Bronco up slowly, chains clinking, tires bumping over the trailer ramps. Caleb kept his face still. He signed the title on the hood of the truck, counted the bills once, and put the envelope in his jacket without looking at it again. When the trailer pulled away, the barn seemed larger and emptier, as if a wall had been removed from his past. Nora came in after a while. She stood where the Bronco had been, looking at the oil stain on the concrete and the rectangle of dust the tires had left behind. "You don't need that truck anymore?" she asked. Caleb leaned against the workbench. His throat felt tight, but his voice stayed even. "I do." Nora looked confused. "Then why did you sell it?" He took a slow breath. There were answers about fence wire, feed bills, vet medicine, and math a 6-year-old should not have to carry. He chose the truth underneath those facts. "Because there are things we like," he said, "and there are people we choose." Nora did not cry. He was grateful for that and a little sorry, too. She only nodded in the serious way she had, then walked back to the house. That afternoon Caleb bought heavy-gauge fence wire, treated posts, 2 bags of feed, Ranger's medicine, and a pair of purple sneakers Nora pretended not to love until she thought he was not looking. He put Walt's payment in an envelope and set aside enough for the electric bill. The money did not solve everything. It simply bought them time without breaking the thing they were trying to build. That night, after Caleb finished stretching the first run of new wire along the east fence, he found a drawing on his workbench. Nora had drawn the Bronco in blue crayon, with its wheels too round and its headlights smiling. Ranger sat in the passenger seat wearing a red bandana. In the driver's seat, she had drawn Caleb with both hands on the wheel. At the bottom, in careful, uneven letters, she had written, "Old truck going to help the farm." Caleb stood in the barn long after the light faded, holding the paper by its corners so he would not smudge it. Outside, the chickens rustled safely in the coop. Ranger barked once from the porch, not alarmed, just checking the dark. In the space where the Bronco had been, Caleb felt the ache of loss settle beside something quieter. Not pride exactly, not peace. Maybe just the first honest understanding that keeping a promise often looked less like a grand sacrifice and more like making room, one beloved thing at a time. The storm arrived after supper, late for winter but too cold to belong to spring, dragging hard rain across Cedar Ridge in gray sheets that swallowed the fields and blurred the tree line into a single dark wall. Caleb had known weather was coming. Everyone had. Mason mentioned it at the feed store. Ruth had circled the forecast in yesterday's newspaper as if the clouds might respect ink. Walt had called before dusk and said, "Tie down what argues with wind." Caleb had done what he could. He latched the coop twice, stacked cinder blocks against the loose tin by the barn, moved feed bags off the floor, and checked the east fence with a flashlight while Ranger paced 10 steps ahead of him, uneasy but controlled. Still, Bellwether Farm had more weak places than a man could reach before dark. By 9, the rain was no longer falling so much as throwing itself at the house. The porch groaned, The windows shivered in their old frames. Nora sat at the kitchen table with her spelling words, pencil still in her hand, but her eyes kept lifting to the ceiling each time the wind hit the roof. Ranger lay beside her chair, not sleeping. Caleb tried to keep his voice level while he washed the last dish. "Storm's loud, that's all." Nora nodded, but her shoulders had climbed almost to her ears. Loud things still carried memories for her. Sudden things did too. Caleb had learned not to tell her there was nothing to be scared of. That only made fear feel lonely. Instead, he dried his hands and said, "You can be scared and still be safe. Those are different." She looked at him for a moment, then moved 1 inch closer to Ranger. Around 10, something tore loose outside with a crack sharp enough to make the kitchen light seem to jump. Ranger was on his feet before Caleb reached the back door. Through the rain-streaked glass, Caleb saw a pale sheet of metal flapping from the barn roof, bending and snapping under the wind. The chickens exploded into panicked noise from the coop, their alarm rising over the storm. Then another sound came, lower and worse, the east fence giving way, posts pulling out of mud one after another. "Stay inside," Caleb said. Nora stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "The chickens. I've got them." But Ranger stepped between her and the door without a command, not threatening, not harsh, just solid. His body blocked the path. His eyes on Caleb, waiting for the order neither of them needed spoken. Caleb pulled on his rain jacket, shoved his feet into boots, and pointed to the hallway. "Nora, bathroom, interior wall. Take your blanket, Ranger stays with you." Her mouth trembled, but she obeyed. That obedience hurt him more than arguing would have. Outside, the rain hit like thrown gravel. Caleb crossed the yard, bent forward, mud sucking at his boots, flashlight beam jerking wild over the grass. The coop door was still shut, but the wind had pulled one corner of the roof loose, and water was blowing through the gap. The hens battered themselves against the wire, frantic and blind with fear. Caleb wedged his shoulder against the door, drove one new screw through the latch plate with shaking hands, then dragged a sheet of plywood from the side of the shed and braced it over the exposed corner. Twice the wind nearly took it from him. Once he slipped to one knee in the mud and felt cold water run down inside his boot. He could not fix the barn. He could not rebuild the fence in a storm. All he could do was keep the animals alive until morning. That was the size of the mission, and for once he did not make it bigger than it was. By dawn, Bellwether looked wounded. The barn roof had lost 3 sheets of tin. The east fence lay in the mud like a line of broken ribs. Brown water cut shallow paths through the yard carrying straw, leaves, and one of Nora's plastic buckets toward the ditch. Caleb stood under the gray morning sky, soaked through, hands aching, too tired even to swear. He was trying to decide where to start when Walt Grady's old pickup came up the drive, tires hissing through puddles. Walt stepped out with a thermos under one arm and several dented sheets of tin tied in the truck bed. "Figured you'd be standing here looking mean at the damage," he said. Caleb wiped rain from his face. "I can handle it. Didn't say you couldn't." Walt lowered the tailgate. "Said I brought tin." An hour later, Ruth Bell's nephew dropped off a paper bag with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and a large thermos of coffee. There was a note in Ruth's handwriting. "Eat before pride makes you stupid." Caleb read it twice and almost smiled. Then Mason Cole arrived with 2 old water troughs, fence staples, and a coil of wire that had clearly seen use but still had life in it. Caleb started to protest before Mason even shut his truck door. "I can't take all this." Mason leaned one elbow on the truck bed. "Good, because I'm not giving it." He pointed toward the equipment. "You fix my backup generator next month. Parts at cost, labor even. These troughs were taking up space anyhow." Caleb looked from Mason to Walt. Neither man looked sorry for him. Neither lowered his voice. Neither glanced toward the house like Nora was a sad story to be handled carefully. They were simply there with materials, terms, and work to do. That made it harder to refuse. Walt handed him a pair of gloves. "Receiving help doesn't make you smaller, Caleb. How you stand up after it tells folks who you are." By afternoon, the coop was dry, the hens were settled, and the east fence stood crooked but functional. Mud still streaked the porch. The barn looked patched rather than repaired. But nothing living had been lost. Denise Harper arrived just as Caleb was rinsing mud from the steps with a bucket of water. He felt his stomach drop when he saw her county car. The timing could not have been worse. Or maybe, he thought, the truth simply never waited for a convenient day. Denise walked the property in boots, careful but unflinching. She saw the patched barn roof, the fresh fence posts, the mud, the stacked materials, the notebook on the kitchen table open to a repair schedule. Inside, the house was clean. Nora's school papers were clipped in order. There was food in the pantry, medication labeled for Ranger, clean bedding, a chore chart with stars Nora had drawn herself, and a small desk by the window where she had written her spelling words in uneven lines. Ranger lay beside the back door, calm under Caleb's command, eyes following Denise but body relaxed. Nora showed Denise the chick chart, explaining which hens were brave and which were emotionally complicated, a phrase she had borrowed from Ruth. Denise listened seriously. She did not laugh at her. When the inspection ended, Caleb stood with her on the porch, bracing himself. Denise looked out at the muddy yard. This place still needs work. Yes, Mom. The barn is fully secure? No, Mom, I have a plan for that. He handed her the notebook before she asked. She read the list, then looked through the window at Nora, who was kneeling beside Ranger and brushing dried mud from his fur with great concentration. Denise closed the notebook. Mr. Mercer, I'm not looking for a perfect house. Caleb said nothing. Denise's voice softened, but only slightly. I'm looking for a place where a child is seen, heard, and safe. The words settled over the porch more quietly than the rain had, and for once Caleb did not rush to prove anything. He only looked at the patched fence, the muddy boots by the door, the neighbor's tire tracks in the drive, and Nora inside the house, no longer flinching every time the wind moved. Bellwether Farm had not become beautiful overnight. It had not become easy. But it had become something more important. A place where help could arrive without shame, where damage could be named without defeat, and where a child could learn that being protected did not mean being pitied. Spring did not arrive at Bellwether Farm all at once. It came in pieces. Shy at first, as if unsure the place was ready for kindness, a pale green line along the potato rows, mud drying at the edges of the drive. The first warm afternoon when Nora left her coat on the porch and did not run back for it. Caleb noticed these things the way he noticed hairline cracks in machinery, not because he was sentimental, but because small changes mattered if you were paying attention. The roof over the living room no longer leaked when rain came through at night. The front porch, still ugly in places, stood firm under a child's running feet. The east fence held its line across the field. The well pump kicked on with a reliable hum that felt, to Caleb, almost like music. The chicken coop had a proper latch now, dry nesting boxes, reinforced wire, and a roof that did not argue with the weather. The garden had begun to lift itself out of the dirt. Potatoes under the soil, green beans reaching for twine, sweet corn pushing through in stubborn blades. None of it looked impressive from the road. But to Caleb, every straight post and every clean egg felt like evidence. Nora changed the same way the farm changed. Not in one miracle, but in evidence. She still slept with Megan's cardigan folded at the bottom of her bed, but she no longer woke every night calling for a light. She still grew quiet when rain hit the windows too hard, but now she checked Ranger first, and if his ears stayed soft, she believed the house was safe. She had a friend at school named Ellie Porter, a red-haired girl with missing front teeth and a laugh loud enough to make Nora laugh by accident. Nora began coming home with stories instead of only papers. Ellie's lunchbox smelled like peanut butter. Ellison's classroom turtle had escaped behind the bookshelf. A boy named Cooper thought chickens laid eggs only if they were in the mood. Caleb listened while fixing hinges or washing feed buckets, learning that children did not always announce healing with big speeches. Sometimes they told you a turtle story and trusted you to understand it meant they had survived the day. Every morning, Nora counted eggs before breakfast. At first, she counted wrong because she gave names to the ones with freckles and got distracted. Then she got serious, carrying a small notebook and pencil like a field scientist. 9 today, she would say. Dodd is still emotionally complicated. Ranger followed her to the coop at a careful distance, no longer needing to press against her leg every step. Nora had learned his sounds too. His single low bark meant something was near the fence. His quick double bark meant Caleb's truck had turned into the drive. His huff through the nose meant a chicken had offended him personally. That's his annoyed sound, Nora told Caleb one morning. Caleb looked at Ranger, who was staring at a hen scratching too close to his paw. He has a lot of those. When the hens began laying steadily, Caleb built a small roadside stand from leftover boards and an old piece of tin roofing. He painted it white because Nora said people trusted white stands more, then let her paint blue letters across the front bell with eggs. $5 a dozen. The first day, nobody stopped. The second day, Ruth Bell bought 2 dozen and left exact change in the jar even though Caleb tried to wave her off. "You don't discount work because it came from your own hands," she said. Mason later told him the same thing in a rougher way. "Don't sell scared. Folks can smell that. Price fair and stand by it." Caleb took the advice seriously. When the green beans came in, he added small paper bags tied with twine. When the sweet corn ripened, he stacked ears in a crate with a handwritten sign. He did not charge high, and he did not apologize for charging. That became another lesson Nora absorbed without anyone turning it into a lecture. Work had value even when it began in a patched barn, even when the person doing it was still learning, even when the stand leaned slightly because one leg was shorter than the others. One afternoon in early June, Caleb was in the kitchen repairing a drawer slide while Nora played outside with Ellie near the fence. Their voices rose and fell in the yard, mixed with chicken noise, Ranger's occasional watchful huff, and the soft knock of wind against the screen door. Caleb had learned to recognize Nora's laugh from a distance. It was still smaller than some children's laughter, as if it asked permission before taking up space. But it came more often now. A moment later, the back door flew open, and Nora ran in holding an egg with both hands, her cheeks flushed. Ranger came behind her, tail sweeping lazily. "Dad, look!" Penny laid the tiny one again. The word landed in the kitchen and stopped everything. Caleb's screwdriver stilled against the drawer. Nora froze halfway across the room, the egg cupped carefully between her palms. Her face changed, joy folding into alarm so quickly it hurt to watch. Ranger stopped between them, looking from one to the other, his tail still moving across the floor in a soft, uncertain rhythm. "I'm sorry," Nora whispered. Caleb set the screwdriver down with deliberate care. He did not move too fast. Some moments were like injured birds. Grab at them and they broke. He knelt until his eyes were level with hers. "You don't have to be sorry." Nora looked at the egg, not at him. "I didn't mean to forget. You didn't forget your mom." Her chin trembled. "But I said." "I know what you said," Caleb's voice stayed low. "And you don't have to apologize for a word that made you feel safe." Nora finally looked up. The fear in her eyes was not fear of Caleb. It was fear of betraying someone who was gone. Caleb understood that kind of loyalty. It had kept him awake many nights. "You can call me Uncle Caleb," he said. "You can call me Caleb if you're mad. You can call me nothing for a while, if that's what you need. I'm not going anywhere because of a word." Ranger stepped closer and pressed his shoulder lightly against Nora's leg. The egg in her hands wobbled. Caleb smiled just enough to let her breathe. "Now," he said, nodding toward it. "Is that Penny's record?" Nora looked down, wiped her cheek with her sleeve, and held the egg out for inspection. "It's very small," she said, but she tried. Caleb took it carefully, as if it were something stronger than it looked. "Then we respect the effort." Outside, Ellie called Nora's name, impatient and alive in the summer air. Nora turned toward the door, then back to Caleb. For 1 second, she seemed to be deciding whether leaving the room would undo what had happened. Caleb gave her the smallest nod. Permission, not pressure. She ran back outside. Ranger followed, stopping once at the threshold to glance at Caleb before returning to his post. Caleb stayed kneeling on the kitchen floor with Penny's tiny egg in his palm. The drawer was still broken. The stand needed more change. The garden needed weeding. Denise's final review was not yet complete. But something in the house had shifted. Nora was not simply being kept at Bellwether Farm anymore. She was beginning to live there. And Caleb, who had once believed fatherhood meant knowing what to say, was learning it might mean something quieter, not taking ownership of a child's heart, not demanding a title, not rushing grief out of the room, but staying steady enough that the child could choose her own words when she was ready. The letter came on a Tuesday afternoon, folded inside a plain white envelope that looked too ordinary to carry the weight of a child's future. Caleb found it in the mailbox between an electric bill and a flyer from a Tractor Supply store advertising discounts he could not afford. The return address was printed in black at the top, Jefferson County Family Court. For a moment he stood at the end of the driveway with the envelope in his hand, listening to the wind push through the sweet corn and the hens fussing behind the coop, as if the world had no idea it had paused. Ranger stood beside him, ears forward, watching the road. Caleb had learned months ago that fear did not always arrive like panic. Sometimes it came quietly, practical and well-mannered, taking a seat inside your chest and waiting for you to notice it. He walked back to the house slowly. The porch held under his boots. That still felt new. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and the green beans Nora had helped snap that morning. Her school drawings were clipped to a string above the small desk by the window. The chore chart hung on the refrigerator, crowded with stars, crooked hearts, and one drawing of Ranger looking, in Nora's words, professionally concerned. Caleb set the bills aside and placed the cord envelope flat on the kitchen table. He did not open it right away. He washed his hands first, though they were not dirty. He dried them on a towel, then dried them again. Through the screen door, he could see Nora outside in purple sneakers and muddy boots pulled over them, carrying the egg basket with both hands. She was talking to the hens in a firm voice, explaining that stepping in the feed pan was not a leadership quality. Ranger glanced toward her, then back to Caleb, as if keeping track of both halves of the farm at once. Caleb finally sat down, the envelope opened cleanly. His hands did shake a little when he unfolded the papers, not enough for anyone else to see, but enough that he pressed the page against the table to keep the words still. He read the first paragraph twice because the legal language tried to hide the meaning inside formal sentences. Then he found the line that mattered. Long-term guardianship approved. No additional placement review required at this time. Minor child to remain in the care of Caleb Thomas Mercer. He sat very still. Relief did not hit him like joy. It moved through him more slowly, like water returning to a dry pump, filling spaces he had stopped admitting were empty. The farm still owed money. The barn roof still looked patched from a distance. The truck needed brake work. There were weeds in the beans, a soft spot near the back steps, and a stack of repair jobs waiting for customers who paid late. Nothing about the paper made life easy. It only made one thing clear. Nora did not have to be temporary anymore. Caleb stood and went to the screen door. "Nora," he called. She looked up from the coop, one hand shielding her eyes from the early summer sun. "Did Penny do something?" "No." Caleb's voice caught just enough that she heard it. Her face changed, and she started toward the house, careful with the basket. Ranger walked beside her, not rushing, his tail low and steady. Nora came in with mud on her boots, freckles across her nose, and 3 brown eggs nestled in the straw. "What happened?" she asked. Caleb held out the paper. She set the basket down and took it with both hands, squinting at the words she could not fully read. Her eyes moved to the seal near the bottom. She knew official paper when she saw it. Children in her situation learned the shape of authority too young. "Is it from the people?" she asked. "Yes, the people who decide." Caleb nodded. "Yes." Nora looked at the page again. "Are they mad?" "No." He lowered himself to one knee so he was not standing over her. That had become a habit now. One he had learned from remembering how Megan used to speak to patients and children. "Eye level first, answer second." "They said you can stay." Nora did not move. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath with her. Outside, a hen clucked once, impatient and unaware. "Like, until when?" she asked. Caleb felt the ache behind that question. Not curiosity. Experience. Every child should know what home means before they understand expiration dates. "For as long as you need this to be home." She looked down at Megan's old cardigan, now too warm for the weather but still tied around her waist. "Does that mean I don't have to pack a suitcase?" Caleb's throat tightened. He kept his voice steady, because she deserved steadiness more than tears. "It means the porch light will be on for you every night." Nora's face folded not into sadness exactly, but into the release of a child who had been holding herself together with both hands, and had finally been told she could set something down. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Caleb held her carefully at first, then fully, one hand against her back, the other resting over her hair. Ranger barked once from the doorway, not warning, not alarm, just one clear sound into the room, as if marking the boundary all of them had been building since the first night at the hospital. This child belonged here. This house knew her name. This farm was guarded. Nora pulled back after a while and wiped her face with her sleeve. "Can I tell Ellie?" "Yes." "Can I tell the chickens?" Caleb nodded. They've been waiting on the legal update. A small laugh escaped her, wet and real. She picked up the egg basket and ran outside, shouting before the screen door even closed. Ranger followed halfway, then stopped on the porch and looked back at Caleb. The dog's muzzle had grayed a little around the edges since they had come to Bellwether. Caleb noticed it now in the angled light. They had all aged in this place, even over a few months. But aging was not always losing. Sometimes it was proof that you had stayed. Caleb returned to the table and read the letter again. Not because he doubted it, because some truths needed to be seen more than once before the body trusted them. He folded the papers carefully and placed them in a folder beside Nora's birth certificate, school records, vaccination forms, and the envelope still marked Nora. College, don't touch. He had never opened it. He never would unless it was for her. That evening after chores, Caleb screwed a new hook beside the front door and hung the court letter there in a clear plastic sleeve until he could buy a proper frame. Nora insisted it should be near the chore chart because staying is also a job we did. Caleb did not correct her. Maybe she was right. Staying had been work. Showing up had been work. Learning had been work. Accepting help without shame had been work. Letting a child choose her own words for love had been work. After sunset, the porch light came on. Its glow spread across the steps Caleb had braced with his own hands, over the boots lined up by the door, across Ranger lying in his usual place where he could see the yard and the kitchen both. The barn still leaned a little. The fence was straight, only if viewed kindly. The garden would not feed them through winter, unless Caleb learned more than he knew now. Bellwether Farm was not saved by a miracle. It was saved by calloused hands, neighbors who knew how to help without taking a man's dignity, a German shepherd who never abandoned his post, and a child who slowly remembered how to laugh. Most of all, it was saved by a man who finally understood that a home was not something you found waiting in perfect condition. It was something you rebuilt, one board, one promise, and one porch light at a time. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories about family, resilience, and second chances. Which moment stayed with you the most, and where are you watching from today?